I used to think my father was the hero of my life. Not the kind of hero you'd read about in books or see on screen. He wore no cape, spoke no grand words, and never performed dazzling feats. He was just a man, ordinary man with rough hands from hard labor, a brisk, decisive walk, and a face that always seemed serious. He never said, "I love you." He didn't hug me every day like Mom used to. But on every birthday, I always found something small that touched me deeply, a handwritten note, in bold and neat strokes, placed neatly beside a simple birthday cake. It's just one line. "I'm always watching over you." There were no flowery words, but I understood. My father's love was like a silent rock beneath the ocean, never flashy, but always there. I grew up in that love, a quiet, unspoken love that shielded me through childhood like an invisible embrace. Then I grew up and left home, went to school far away, then work, then marriage. Finally, I settled in a country halfway across the world. Life pulled me along like a river in full current. The calls became infrequent. The little notes stopped coming. I told myself he was fine, strong, and stoic, just as he'd always been. But deep down, I knew I had let the image of my once watchful father fade into a distant memory. The man who silently stood beside me through every milestone had become a shadow I barely remembered in my busy, grown-up heart. Early, Dad lived alone for many years. Every time I called, his voice was calm. "I'm okay. Don't worry." At first, I believed him. He was never one to share feelings. He always kept things to himself. But gradually, I started noticing long pauses between his words, as if he were hiding something, as if he was afraid that if he said more, his loneliness might slip out. One morning, as I was rushing to work, my phone rang. Strange number from Vietnam. I hesitated before answering, and my heart sank when I heard the panicked voice of our neighbor. "Dear, your father slipped in the bathroom. No one knew. ... He lay there all night. We only found him this morning." I froze. The phone slid from my hand. A chill ran down my spine. In that moment, everything I believed about my father's strength shattered. His age, his weakening body, the long nights alone crashed down on me like a storm. I booked a flight without thinking. No second guesses. I just knew I had to go home. Now the old house was still there, every wall, every window frame, every brick path. But something had changed. It wasn't the furniture or the light. It was the feeling. The house no longer felt like a home. It was empty, eerily quiet, like all the laughter and warmth of the past had been locked away somewhere. In memory. Dad sat silently by the window where Mom used to keep a pot of yellow chrysanthemums. His face was gaunt, his eyes dimmer than I remembered. He gazed out into the garden as if waiting for someone or something to return. I approached, trying to keep my voice gentle. "Why didn't you call me, Dad? Why did you go through it alone?" He turned, smiled faintly like a breeze. "Because I thought you were happy. I didn't want to disturb you." And in that moment, I realized he had never stopped watching over me. I had just forgotten how to look back. I cried, not out of pain or guilt, but because for the first time in many years, I stopped rushing past his presence. I leaned my head on his shoulder, the same shoulder I once thought was the strongest thing in the world. That shoulder had carried me through muddy roads on stormy days, his arms steady beneath me. That shoulder had held up under 2 jobs, mechanic by day, construction worker by night, to pay my tuition, to buy my school shoes. Now that same shoulder was smaller, the bones visible. Beneath a thin shirt, I leaned in softly, afraid that if I leaned too hard, he might crumble. For the first time, I no longer saw him as a hero. I saw him as an aging father who loved deeply in his own way, awkward, silent, but unwavering. I chose to stay, not as a favor, not out of duty. I stayed because my heart told me to, because I knew time was running short. Every afternoon, I made 2 cups of tea and brought chairs to the porch. We sat side by side like we'd never been apart. He told me stories about mom-quiet memories that sparkled like sunlight touching leftover dew. He smiled gently, his eyes far away as if stepping into a world only he remembered. I told him about my life abroad, my husband, my office job, the meetings and the cocktail parties I never felt I belonged to. And he just nodded. No judgment, no questions, just listening. It's the way he always had. Neither of us spoke of that night in the bathroom, but we both knew that night had brought me home. I began to see my father with new eyes, not as a child seeking love, but as an adult ready to give it back. Each morning, I cooked breakfast just as he had when I was small. I paid attention to every cough, every whisper. I learned his medication schedule, wrapped a scarf around his neck when the wind picked up. For a man who spent his life giving, he didn't know how to receive care. But now, he was learning. One evening, I was clearing the table when my eyes stopped at the empty chair at the end. Mom's old chair. No one had touched it for years, but that night, it tugged at my heart. I looked over at Dad. He was dozing off, still holding an open newspaper. His head tilted slightly, the sunset bathing his silver hair. And I realized that empty chair wasn't just Mom's, it symbolized him. Hay had been sitting in that chair waiting for someone to come back, not to wash dishes, not to bring medicine, but to remember him, to truly see him not as a shadow in the corner, but as a man full of love, longing, and a quiet ache to be near his child again. I once believed my hero had disappeared. That age had swallowed him whole. That silence had buried the love we once shared. But I was wrong. My father never left. He just grew old. And I had gone too far away. He's still here, no longer the hero of my childhood, but the father I now truly see. A full person, with emotions, regrets, memories, and hope. He sits on the empty chair at the dinner table, not to be cared for, but to be remembered. And for the first time, I understand. He doesn't need to be called a hero. He just needs to be called Dad, and for me to stay a little longer. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us to cherish those we love.